Lillian Hart realized she had made a terrible mistake the moment she stepped onto the platform in Cheyenne and saw the man waiting for her. His boots were tied together with twine. His coat was torn at the shoulder. His face was hidden behind a rough beard and a hat pulled so low it swallowed his eyes. She had escaped debt in Boston only to walk straight into a life of dirt and hunger. She felt it in her bones. What she did not know was that the man holding her suitcase with those scarred, weathered hands could sign checks big enough to buy half the West. She did not know he was hiding a secret that powerful men had killed for, and she definitely did not know that the rotting sod house she was about to enter was not a home at all, but the last safe place standing between her and a war that was already on its way. The truth would come later. For now, she only saw the twine on his boots. Lillian had grown up believing rain washed a city clean, but in Boston, rain only made the dirt shine darker. She kept her head down as she walked along Wharf Street, her threadbare coat pulled tight, her fingers wrapped around the letter in her pocket. It was the only protection she had left, the only thing standing between her and Tobias Crowley. Her father had owed Crowley $2,000, a sum that drowned him long before heart failure stole his last breath. Lillian, making pennies sewing hems, inherited the debt the moment he died. Crowley was no banker. He was the kind of man who collected debts with his fists and smiled while doing it. She saw one of his men waiting outside her boarding house, a brute named O'Malley. Lillian didn't hesitate. She turned down a side alley and pressed her back to the cold bricks, breathing hard. She couldn't go home. She couldn't collect her clothes or her mother's locket. Staying in Boston meant dying in Boston. Her hands shook as she pulled out the newspaper clipping she had been reading for weeks. Wanted, wife of sturdy constitution. Life is hard. Solitude is certain. I offer shelter and protection. No luxuries. Write to Jeremiah Holt, Blackwater Ridge, Wyoming Territory. It was the bleakest proposal she had ever seen, but the word protection held her like a lifeline. Jeremiah Holt had telegraphed money for a third-class train ticket and sent only one instruction: come alone. Tell no one. So she ran. The train west felt endless. The brick walls of the city faded into rolling fields, then open plains so wide they made her feel small enough to disappear. By the time she stepped off the train in Cheyenne, her clothes were wrinkled, her hair tangled, and her heart hollow with fear. Lillian Hart. The voice behind her sounded like gravel washing in river water. She turned and saw the man whose letter had dragged her across the country. He towered over her, broad-shouldered and silent, the kind of man who carried danger around like a shadow. His boots were held together with a string. His coat was stained with mud and oil. "Mr. Holt?" He didn't smile, just nodded once. She had expected poor, but not this. He looked like a man who had been beaten down by life and was almost ready to stay down. He lifted her single bag with ease and led her through the crowded streets of Cheyenne, past saloons and painted women laughing on balconies, past busy carriage houses, past nice wagons, straight to the worst wagon in the entire lot, a buckboard with splintered wood and a horse that looked one winter away from death. "You coming?" Jeremiah asked. Lillian had nowhere else to go. She climbed onto the hard wooden bench. The first hours of the journey were silent. The Wyoming land was beautiful in a way that stung, wide, cold, and uncaring. Jeremiah didn't speak unless he had to. He scanned the ridges, the open fields, the shadows cast by boulders. His posture was tight, his eyes never still. "Is it far?" she finally asked. "An hour." His voice surprised her, clear, steady, intelligent. Not the uneducated country drawl she expected. They turned off the trail as night fell. The temperature dropped fast, biting through her coat. Jeremiah reached behind the seat and handed her a thick wool blanket. It was warm and smelled of smoke. They crested a rise and Lillian's breath caught. The home was carved into the hill itself, a sod house, half dirt, half logs, barely a structure at all. It looked like something a wild animal would crawl into to die. "This is it," Jeremiah said. Inside, the one-room dwelling was as rough as she feared. Dirt floor, A bed covered in furs, a dying fire in a stove, a table and chairs that looked like they were built with an axe and frustration. Jeremiah set her bag down. "There's stew in the pot. Eat. I'll tend the horse." When he stepped out, Lillian's chest tightened. This was her life now. She was the wife of a man too poor to afford boots, but as she ate the stew and her eyes adjusted to the dim light, something didn't fit. The table was crude, but the chair beside it was mahogany, real mahogany. The shelf above the bed held books, not a Bible only, but volumes she recognized from wealthy Boston homes, fine leather bindings. Shakespeare, Marcus Aurelius, Adam Smith. She touched the spine of one in disbelief. Notes filled the margins, intelligent notes, precise. "You like to read?" She spun, startled. Jeremiah stood in the doorway, hat off, coat shed. In the lamplight, he looked younger. Hard, yes, but striking. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "A man who reads philosophy, living in a house made of dirt." Jeremiah looked at the books, leftovers from a past life. Her gaze dropped to the heavy lock on the door, a lock thick enough for a bank vault. "What are you afraid of, Jeremiah?" He stepped closer. Too close. "There are wolves in these hills," he said quietly. "And things worse than wolves." His eyes held hers. "You wanted protection. I'm giving it to you, but don't ask about the past." She wanted to argue. But she also saw something in his face, a sadness deep and hidden. Then she noticed the gold ring on a chain around his neck, heavy. Pure gold, not something a poor man would own. "Take the bed," he said, breaking the moment. "I'll sleep in the barn. We marry proper next week." But as he reached for his rifle, she made one mistake. "Jeremiah." "Who is Mr. Sterling?" He froze. His voice dropped to a cold growl. "He is the man who owns this territory. And if he finds out you're here, God help us both." He slammed the door, leaving her alone with a house of dirt, a shelf of secrets, and a husband who was clearly not what he seemed. The first light of dawn didn't warm the sod house. It cut through it. Sharp beams slipped through cracks in the door and walls, waking Lillian with an ache in her bones. Her back was stiff, her eyes heavy. For one hopeful second, she thought she was back in her tiny Boston boarding room. Then she smelled the earth, the dry, cold air, and the faint scent of sage. This was her life now, a stranger's dirt home in the middle of nowhere. Jeremiah was gone. The heavy bolt on the door was unlatched. A wool blanket lay folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Lillian wrapped it around her shoulders and stepped outside. The air was crisp and smelled of pine. She walked slowly across the frosted ground, trying to steady herself. The valley bowl was surrounded by steep granite cliffs, like a natural fortress. But the house and the leaning barn looked fragile against it all. She needed to understand the kind of life she had stepped into. The barn door hung crooked, held closed by a piece of rope. Lillian lifted it and squeezed inside. At first it looked exactly as expected. Rusted tools, broken harnesses, a pile of old hay. But something felt wrong. The barn looked too small inside. The back wall sat 20 feet in, but the outside structure ran at least 30. 10 feet were missing. Her instincts, trained from years of sewing, measuring, noticing details, kicked in. She pulled at the stacked hay bales. They shifted too easily, revealing a heavy canvas tarp stretched across something solid. Her pulse quickened. She yanked the tarp aside. A steel door. Not a barn door. Not a hideout door. A reinforced, black-painted iron vault door with a locking wheel in the center. A vault. In a rotting barn. Her head spun. What was Jeremiah hiding? Gold? Stolen money? Was he a thief? She looked down. The dirt floor around the vault wasn't dirt at all. It was a wooden platform covered with soil. She brushed the dust away and found a trapdoor with an iron ring. Empty, silent. She pulled the ring and lifted. The trapdoor rose smoothly on well-oiled hinges. A ladder disappeared into cool, faintly glowing darkness. Her heart thudded, but she climbed down. Her boots touched solid wood. She turned and gasped. She wasn't in a cellar. She was in an underground command room. Maps covered the large drafting table in the center, not hand-sketched notes, professional surveys of the entire county. The walls held geological samples labeled with neat handwriting, rock cores, soil types, mineral analysis. A telegraph machine sat on the desk. Wires ran up into the ceiling. This wasn't poverty. This was planning. Strategy. Power. Lillian walked slowly to the table. A large map showed Blackwater Ridge and the land surrounding it. Almost all of them were marked in red with the name C. Sterling. But a single blue-marked line, thin as a thread, cut through the red territory and started directly beneath Jeremiah's homestead. The legend read, Blackwater Aquifer Primary Access Point. Her eyes dropped to the stamp below it. Deed holder, Jeremiah Holt. Her breath caught. Water was more valuable than gold in the territory. Whoever controlled it controlled everything. Jeremiah didn't own worthless land. He owned the throat of the entire valley. She moved to the desk. A ledger sat open. She read the last entries. Sterling offers $5,000 declined. Sterling offers $10,000 declined. Barn burned. Warning. Sterling offers $50,000 declined. $50,000. Enough to buy half the county. Enough to leave. Enough to start a new life anywhere in the world. And Jeremiah chose to stay. I told you not to ask questions. Lillian spun around. Jeremiah stood at the top of the ladder, his face shadowed, his rifle in hand. But he didn't look furious. He looked tired, resigned. He climbed down slowly, then walked past her and closed the ledger. You're not a farmer, Lillian whispered. You're a wealthy man. Jeremiah let out a humorless laugh. I'm a man with a deed that could make me rich and a target that keeps me one step from a grave.
He pointed at the maps.
I was a surveyor for the railroad, found the aquifer, bought the land cheap before Sterling knew what he had. When he found out the water source wasn't on his side of the ridge, he bought everything around me. All of it. But the spring still starts here. And the sod house? Lillian asked softly. The broken boots? The poverty? Jeremiah looked at her. To survive, if I look poor, harmless, beaten down, he leaves me alone long enough for me to hold the deed. If I act rich, he kills me and takes it. Lillian stepped back, breath shaking. So, what am I? Why bring me here? His expression softened for the first time. I needed a wife. Under the Homestead Act, a married man can file for double acreage. It protects the southern ridge. Without you, he could grab it. Lillian swallowed hard. So I'm a legal extension. You're a partner, Jeremiah said quietly, and stronger than you know. Before she could reply, he moved to the ladder. Get your coat. We need supplies. And you need to see the man we're hiding from. They rode the wagon into Blackwater Ridge 2 hours later. Lillian wore her oldest dress, dust rubbed into the hem. Jeremiah hunched his shoulders and dragged his boots to look weaker, poorer, smaller. Don't speak unless spoken to, he murmured, and, whatever you do, don't look Sterling in the eye. The town was busy, but the moment Jeremiah walked in, the noise dipped. People looked away, some with pity, some with fear. Inside Higgins' general store, Lillian felt every stare. Mrs. Higgins kept her voice cold, distant. Thin credit, Mr. Holt, Jeremiah nodded, keeping his head down. Got a little cash. Lillian's jaw tightened. If they only knew. The door chimed. The room went still. A man walked in wearing the finest gray suit she had ever seen. His silver-tipped cane tapped rhythmically on the wood floor. His hair was perfectly combed. His smile was thin and sharp. Caleb Sterling, the king of the valley, the man who owned everything, except Jeremiah's land. His gaze locked onto them. Well, well, Sterling said softly. The hermit brings his wife to town. He stepped closer, then closer, until she could smell the expensive cologne on his gloves. He lifted her chin with 2 fingers. A Boston girl, he murmured. Pretty. You'll tire of dirt soon enough. When you do, my hotel has hot baths and warm beds." Jeremiah stiffened. His hand twitched near his coat. Two gunmen behind Sterling dropped their hands to their pistols. If Jeremiah moved, he died. Lillian jerked her chin away. "I prefer dirt," she said, her voice calm and clear. "It's cleaner." The store went silent. Sterling's smile vanished for a flicker of a second. Then he leaned in. "We'll see how clean you feel when winter comes." He tipped his hat and walked out. Jeremiah grabbed Lillian's arm and pulled her outside. "You should not have spoken," he hissed. "He touched me," she said. "I said what I had to. He wanted me to draw. If I draw, his men shoot me, and he takes the land legally." He climbed onto the wagon. "We're out of time. He knows about you now, and winter's coming." Lillian swallowed. "What do we do?" Jeremiah stared at the storm clouds gathering over the ridge. "We stop hiding." He reached under the seat and handed her a Winchester rifle. "And you better learn how to shoot." The first snowstorm didn't drift over Blackwater Ridge. It attacked it. Wind ripped through the canyons with a howl that shook the sod house frame. Snow hammered the earth in thick sheets, swallowing the valley bowl in white. Inside, the air felt tight, charged, waiting for something bad to happen. Jeremiah moved Lillian outside every day, training her until her arms trembled. He showed her how to load the Winchester without looking at her hands, how to step back while keeping her aim steady, how to breathe through fear. Crack. The tin can on the fence post spun in the air and vanished into the snow. "Good," Jeremiah said. There was no smile. "Only respect." Again. Lillian braced the rifle, her shoulder aching from bruises deep in purple. Her fingertips burned with cold. But she didn't complain. "Do you really think he'll come in this weather?" she asked. Jeremiah scanned the ridge with narrowed eyes. "If Sterling wants a fire to look like an accident, now is when he moves. Snow keeps the smoke low. Snow hides tracks. Snow makes bodies disappear." She swallowed. "Jeremiah, if he kills us, he won't," Jeremiah said, though his jaw tightened. "Not if we stay ahead." He turned toward her, and for a moment the hardness in his face cracked. He saw her exhaustion, her courage, her growing fire. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This isn't the life you deserved." Lillian rubbed her shoulder. "Your letter said hard work and no luxuries. You kept your word."
You just forgot to mention the war part.
Jeremiah almost smiled. Almost. His voice dropped. "If things go wrong, there's a safe behind the map rack. Enough gold to get you far away. There's a tunnel that leaves the bunker through the creek bed. If I fall, you take it. Don't look back." Lillian stared at him. "I'm not leaving you. Not again. I ran from Boston. I'm not running here." Jeremiah looked like he wanted to argue, but then a sharp snap echoed through the valley. One branch breaking, too heavy to be a deer, too close to ignore. "Inside," Jeremiah whispered. "Now." They ran into the house and dropped the bolt. Jeremiah snuffed the lantern, sending the room into a gray blur lit only by the smoldering stove. He moved to the shutter and peered through a narrow crack. "How many?" Lillian whispered. 5 riders. Coming up the creek bed." Jeremiah's voice was steady. "They're coming to burn us." Before she could answer, a bottle crashed through the window. Kerosene sprayed across the wall. A burning rag followed. Flames exploded up the newspaper-lined walls. "Come out, Holt!" someone shouted outside. "Come out and burn!" Bullets tore through the front wall, splinters raining onto the dirt floor. "We can't stay here," Jeremiah coughed. "Roof won't hold." "The bunker!" Lillian shouted. "No time. If they see us open the trapdoor, they'll find everything. I'll draw them off. You get out the back window. Go to the barn ruins. Hide. Jeremiah, go." He slammed his shoulder against the door, shoved it open and rolled into the snow. Gunfire cracked from every direction. Jeremiah fired back, dropping one rider instantly. 2 more circled him. Lillian crawled out the back window, freezing mud soaking her dress. She crouched behind the house and peeked around the corner. Jeremiah was pinned, crouched behind the water barrel. One man dismounted and walked toward the burning doorway holding a torch. Another fire would trap Jeremiah between flames and bullets. Lillian steadied the Winchester. Breath in, breath out. Squeeze, crack. The torchbearer screamed and fell. The riders spun in confusion. Exactly what Jeremiah needed. He rose and fired 3 shots in clean succession. One rider fell, another's horse reared. The last men panicked and fled into the darkness. "Lillian!" Jeremiah gasped. She ran to him, his hand pressed to his side, blood seeping through his coat. "Oh, God, you're hit." "Just a graze," he lied. He could barely breathe. Barn. Bunker. Now. The sod house roared behind them like a beast on fire. Lillian dragged him across the yard, his weight heavy on her shoulder. They reached the barn. She pulled open the trap door and helped him down the ladder, one agonizing step at a time. When they reached the bottom, Jeremiah collapsed. Lillian sealed the hatch above them and spun the locking wheel tight. Silence swallowed them. Lillian tore open his coat. The bullet had slashed above his hip, not deadly, but bloody. She grabbed the medical kit and whiskey. Her hands shook, but her stitches were steady. Years of needlework found a terrible new purpose. Jeremiah passed out before she was finished. Hours later, when he finally slept, Lillian stood in the dim light and understood. They were trapped. Sterling would think they were dead, for now, but winter wouldn't last forever. She needed help. She walked to the telegraph machine. Next to it was a small notebook labeled Cipher. The last page held simple emergency instructions. Contact, Laramie Freight Line. Name, Dutch Van Doren. Lillian tapped out a shaky message. SOSBLACKWATERHOLTDOWN. Minutes passed. Silence. Then the machine clicked. RECEIVEDWHOISTHIS. Lillian tapped back.
HISWIFE. Another pause.
Then HOLDFASTDUTCHISROLLING. Lillian slumped back. Relief flooded her chest. 2 days later, Dutch Van Doren climbed down the ladder with 2 men carrying a crate, and the rattling sound of a Gatling gun rattled the walls. "You look half dead," Dutch said to Jeremiah. "But you're breathing. Good, because we got work." Lillian wasn't helpless anymore. She had her own fire now. "Sterling thinks we're dead," she said. "Let him. But we need the survey maps delivered to the railroad board before the supply train leaves tonight." Dutch frowned. "Roads are watched. We won't get a wagon through." "Then we take the river," Lillian said. "It's dangerous. That's why Sterling won't expect it." Jeremiah tried to stand, but groaned. "I'm going." "You can't even walk," Lillian said. "I'm going. Dutch goes with me. You hold the bunker." Jeremiah looked at her with something stronger than trust. "Go," he said. "I'll hold the line." They dragged the tiny logging skiff to the freezing river and pushed off. Rapids slammed into them, but Dutch steered hard, shouting over the roar. As the skiff reached the rail line, the supply train, the Union Pacific number 119, was already pulling away. Lillian didn't hesitate. She ran, leapt, grabbed the side rail, and pulled herself onto the moving train. Steam blasted across her face. She shoved the oilskin tube into the conductor's hands. "These maps save the company millions. They must reach the board tonight." The train barreled east. She had done it. Back at Blackwater Ridge, Jeremiah was down to his last bullet. Sterling's men surrounded the bunker. Just as they readied their final assault, the ground thundered. Hooves, shouts. And Lillian, riding at the front of a squad of U.S. Marshals. Caleb Sterling stepped forward, cane in hand, fury twisting his face. "It's over," Lillian said. "The board chose the southern route. Your land is worthless. Your loans are called in. It's done." Sterling raised his cane, revealing the gun barrel hidden inside. A marshal fired first. Sterling fell to his knees, shocked, beaten, ruined. As he was dragged away in irons, Jeremiah stumbled from the bunker, pale and bloodied. Lillian caught him. "I told you I wouldn't run," she whispered. Jeremiah pulled the gold ring from his neck and slid it onto her finger. At last. 3 years later, the sod house was long gone. A white timber mansion stood in its place. The railroad brought new life to the valley, and people spoke the truth. Lillian Holt didn't just marry a man. She saved a town. She toppled a tyrant. She built an empire. And she proved that in the Wild West, sometimes the strongest weapon wasn't a gun. It was a woman with a plan.